And to me, I've been following whom I call the moderate Democrats. I don't really believe there's such a thing, but there's a group of moderate Democrats such as Rui Teixeira and James Carville and Nate Moore and maybe Noah Smith. I'm not sure. But there's a group of these people who for over a year have been doing their best to scream from their news articles, their written posts, their interviews that the Democrat Party had to get more moderate, move more toward the middle if it had any hope of winning an election again. And just the opposite has been happening, as you know. I mean, look at New York with your wonderful, amazing Zoran, who is likely to win the mayor's race there. Um, but anyway, these moderates have been saying, you guys are going off a cliff with this stuff for over a year. So I made whatever bones I have in 2016 by calling the Trump election. It's in my book, How Trump Won. I called it on Twitter in October saying Trump will win with, quote, between 300 and 320 electoral votes.
Hello, culminators. How are you today? I'm happy. I'm good because I'm going to be talking to Professor Larry Schweikart, America's history teacher. The history teacher you always wish you had, even if you had really great history teachers as I did, and much less if you had the kind of history teachers we seem to have today. Because Larry, why he's the rock and roll drummer who brings history to life. He is a very down-to-earth guy. He is tons of fun on X, which is where I met him. He, besides being an historian and an author of a couple dozen books on history, including A Patriot's History, he taught at the University of Dayton for 20 years. Okay, maybe it's more than 25. Maybe it's 25. I've lost track. To the extent that I was ever keeping track, I certainly am not keeping track now. The number's just too big for me. So we're going to talk to Larry. We're going to talk about the stuff he does, and we're going to talk about things that are sticking in his craw. And the good thing about Larry Schweikart is that there's always something. How you doing, Larry?
Hi, Ron. I'm good. How are you?
Pretty good, thank you. Okay, so let's see. A Patriot's History, that's the one over your left shoulder.
Yep.
And it's something for the 10th anniversary edition. Look, what does it say?
Yeah, we
Is
have a
that
over
pizzazz?
20th anniversary edition because I make free a new chapter from 2018 to 2023. Anybody wants to email me at larry@wildworldofhistory.com. I'll send you the new chapter.
Oh, cool. Free updates, or at least one free update.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to do that as soon as we get off. And over your right shoulder, it looks to me that there's is that the most recent book? Is that the idea?
It's the book coming out in February, America in the 21st Century. It was clear that Penguin wasn't going to do a new edition of Patriots History. And I thought, almost 25 years have passed since the book first came out. We need to have a history book that covers the last 25 years. I know you go, wow, it went by so quick. You think Y2K and 9/11 were like yesterday, but in fact, they were 25 years ago.
Yeah, yeah. And I see below the two books is a reference to your website, which I am going to throw up here before. I mean, let's get all this done.
Yeah. Well, wildworldofhistory.com is my history website. I have a full curriculum in U.S. and world history. I will be adding a one semester course in government called Good Government next year. And I hope I have enough time and effort available to add a one semester course in economics called Good Economics. All that's available at wildworldofhistory.com. My political side, for those who aren't interested in the homeschoolers, the people who just want a history curriculum, my other side is wildworldofpolitics.com. And for anybody who subscribes to that, you get my weekly Substack, you get my weekly 3-time commentary, and I do all sorts of video commentary lessons. My latest one is on Billy Graham, integrity. I just finished one on Churchill, integrity. I have several others, including the rise and fall of globalism. So you can check that out at the Insider at Wild World of Politics.
Amazing. Amazing. Renaissance man. Larry, you're talking about the stuff that is so basic and should be so basic to American civic life and political discourse, and which is so profoundly absent from the learning of people who are really shaping discourse and taking part in it today. What the hell's going on? Why haven't you sold enough books?
Patriots History is now in its 45th printing with 500,000 copies in print. In our first decade, we actually outsold Howard Zinn and his People's History in its first decade. Then the college, acquisitions took over, and we got left behind. We're only about half his total sales now, but what can you do? But can I start with this? Because I think this is one of the most overlooked, fundamental, critical details of American history. People just don't know this. I always call Martin Van Buren, who later was president, the most important American nobody has ever heard of. And that's because he completely changed the political party system to the structure that we now have today. And he did it in the 1820s, and he based it entirely on a completely new idea, not ideology, not what's good, bad, right, wrong, not this policy versus that policy. It was entirely done to protect and preserve the institution of slavery. And Martin Van Buren's critical development of a new party, there was only one party at the time. People would say there's only one party today, the Uniparty, but there was only one political party at the time called, ready for this, the Democratic Republicans, right? But they were replaced temporarily by a new Democrat Party created by Martin Van Buren. And the genius of Van Buren, and also the tragedy, is that he based loyalty to the party on not saying anything about slavery. It didn't matter what views you had, don't say anything about slavery. And I will reward you, said Martin Van Buren, with party jobs, with state and local government jobs, with federal government jobs. In other words, he essentially bought votes for this new Democrat Party, and all you had to do to get these jobs and to be rewarded in the party was shut up about the issue of slavery. Well, that did two things. Number one, it helped protect slavery for about 40 more years. But number two, the more
important... Let me stop you before you get to number two so I understand.
Sure.
So the idea was to get people, say, hey, Mr. Man, I will provide party support for you. I will provide political support, a platform, funding. I'm going to get you into office. There's just one thing I ask of you. No discussion. And you will owe me your loyalty.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not going to ask much of you. I might ask something of you, but there's one thing I absolutely will ask of you, and that's take slavery off the agenda for public discussion. Okay, I got it.
Exactly. And it went even further than that. This is not for our whole talk here, but people need to understand that newspapers, as we now understand it, the media, as we now understand it, was created by Martin Van Buren for one purpose only, to support the Democrat Party. And he literally started newspapers all around the country with party money and hired his own editors with party money. And their only goal was to elect Democrats. It was not to report the news, ever. It was to get Democrats elected. And then when another party came along called the Whigs, the playing field was set. Okay, and to get elected. Now, the Whigs had different priorities, but to get elected, you still had to play the game of giving away jobs. And they had to create their own papers. And the papers were very honest at that time because they told you in their masthead who they were for. The Richmond Whig, the Alabama Democrat. In Arizona, where I come from, up until the 1970s, we had a paper called the Arizona Republican. And it was very clearly a Republican paper, but as they sought to broaden their audience, they changed the name to the Arizona Republic. And they got much, much, much more Democratic. That's a story for another time. So this did had the effect of causing government to start to grow with every single election. Because now it's not just the Democrats promising jobs, it's whoever is competing with the Democrats promising jobs. And so if Democrat Mr. Jones is running for office and he says, oh, yeah, I'll move a military base here that will create 1,000 jobs, Whig or Republican Mr. Smith says, oh, well, I'll get two bases to move here, creating 2,000 jobs. And therefore, government started to grow. It's hard to see by the 1830s, but you can track it. Government per capita, government in any way you can measure it, begins to grow under Martin Van Buren, Andrew Jackson, because everybody has to give away jobs, government jobs, to get elected.
Now, wouldn't what you just described, the natural growth of government that is going to be the fruit of a spoil system, wouldn't that have happened even without Van Buren's particular project on the slavery piece? It wasn't that
Well,
inevitable?
it hadn't happened. I guess it's a hard, proving a negative is impossible,
All
but
right.
it hadn't happened up to that point because up to that point, the parties were more or less the Federalists and the Jeffersonian Republicans were more or less ideological parties, and they argued about whether or not government should be run by the finest, best minds like Hamilton and Madison and people like that, or should it be run by the common man? Should government only focus on those things very clearly outlined in the Constitution, or was there some leeway for things like internal improvements, things like that, fighting about policies and issues? But of course, the one thing they never fought about was slavery. So when Van Buren came in and put this on the table, it transferred right into Congress, and you got a gag rule passed in the House where anything with slavery, even mentioned, was immediately tabled and could not get discussion. And the more you suppress this is an irony of history. The more you suppress this, the more it came to the fore. And slavery began to come up in almost every single issue, whether it was debates about the tariff, debates about land, the Webster-Hayne debate, for example. No matter where you went, it's like whack-a-mole. You knock it down in one place and it starts to pop up someplace else, showing you how critically important that issue was and how simply trying to bribe people not to talk about it was not going to work long
And
term.
Sean Wilentz, in his brief moment of lucidity, my former professor, um, wrote a book and arguing that the idea that the United States was fundamentally and institutionally built on slavery, the 1619 Project argument, is really a defamatory. That the struggle over slavery was from go. And what you're describing here are these incredible forces that, as the country, well, let's call that an industrial revolution, a Freudian slip.
Yeah.
As the country grows more and more sophisticated, and there's more to talk about, and there's more on the table, that fundamental breach at the bottom becomes more and more obvious.
Well, two things. First of all, Wilentz is great, and I don't approve of most of his positions, but as a historian, he's pretty solid.
He really is. He's also a great guy. He's just a communist.
Yeah, yeah. Second of all, I go into detail this, Mike and I do in Patriots History a little bit, but if you really want the detailed explanation, you could read Robert Rimini, who won't put it in quite so many words. He kind of hints at it because he's a Democrat. But you could read my book, Seven Events That Made America. And in chapter 1, I have Martin Van Buren has a nightmare and starts the Democrat Party. But let's back up a little bit because you talk about this change and why did this change occur? And I should have mentioned this earlier. It occurs for one reason. The whole reason this begins to explode is the Missouri Compromise.
This is
The
exactly what I
Missouri
was wondering.
Compromise,
Okay, good.
for people who don't know, admitted Missouri as a slave state, Maine as a free state. This continued the sectional balance that we had had with the admission of almost every state going back to the Constitution. However, big change, it drew an imaginary line across America at the 36-degree, 30-minute parallel. Any new territory above that line coming into the Union had to be free soil. Anything below that line could choose slavery or freedom. Now, what's above that line in 1820? Well, above that line would be almost everything. Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa, the Dakotas, Wyoming, Montana, Colorado, Utah, Idaho, all of this territory now threatened, if you're a Democrat, to come into the Union as free states. And when you admit that many senators and that many representatives over a span of, say, 10 or 15 or 20 years, all of a sudden, the free states now have almost a two-thirds majority to put in place any laws banning or limiting slavery. And that's why Van Buren was just triggered by this. By the way, so was Thomas Jefferson. He said the news of the Missouri Compromise awoke him like a fire bell in the night. And you're in New York, right?
Yes.
Yeah, you don't get tornado warnings. I lived in Ohio for a while. We had tornado warnings. You hear that siren, oh, you freak out. You grab your keys, your wallet, some water, a radio, the dog, the cat, the kids, if they've been good, and you run down to the basement and you ride it out. It's terrifying. This is what Van Buren saw when he saw that map you just put up. My gosh, the country is going to be free soil, and they're going to vote to get rid of slavery peacefully. So that is another reason this change begins to occur so rapidly in the late 1820s. It's not that Andrew Jackson was cheated out of the presidency by the corrupt bargain. Yeah, that may be true. It may not be true. It's irrelevant. What's relevant is that Van Buren sees this threat. The third thing I want to mention with regards to that, there is a new book everybody should look at. It's a big one. It's about 500 pages by Stephen Oakes, Oakes. And his book is called Freedom National. And he looks at how, while all these other things I just described were going on, something else happened in about the 1820s. And it was the abolitionist movement woke up. And they said, wait a minute, slavery is not in the Constitution. The word slave and the word slavery is not mentioned in the Constitution. The words in the Constitution, and this is very important, words mean things. Unfree persons. And all of a sudden it dawned on them, the founders, even the pro-slavers, viewed slaves as persons, not property, which the South believed they were property. And so when you start to see all of this in the scope of this change in definitions, Oakes says, and he has incredible evidence to back this up, very slowly people were coming to the understanding that slaves are people. They aren't property, and you cannot treat them like property. And therefore, a definitional sea change was coming that was going to invade the South if they didn't do something. And by the 1850s, they are saying, you know, we're either going to lose our slaves peacefully through the ballot, or we're going to lose them at the cartridge box, you know, in war. We're going to lose them one way or another. We might as well fight for them right now and see where we get. And both Northerners and Southerners by the 1850s were saying this flat out. There's either going to be a war or we're going to lose our slaves peacefully.
Now, but in 1820, they're doing all this because they're trying to rig the political system. It would appear that by virtue of doing that, but in the 1820s, was an admission that secession wasn't an option.
Right. And we see that in the 1832-ish battle over the tariff of abominations. People say all the anti-Lincoln people, but I'm not even going to name them and give them credit. But all the anti-Lincoln people, oh, it's about the tariff and it's about states' rights. Well, if it was about the tariff, they would have seceded in the 1830s over the tariff of abominations. It's interesting that the only states' right that these guys ever cite, and it's in the Confederate Constitution, not once, not twice, but three times, is slavery.
It's also interesting, now that you mention it, that the anti-Lincoln crowd likes to blame him for the expansion of government. In other words, the strong national government, the end of federalism, that's the great, that's
Yep.
why he's sic semper tyrannis. But you're saying, no, no, go back to Van Buren.
Yeah.
I mean, listen, as a New Yorker, okay, Tammany Hall was not invented in 1865.
I don't know if you've. I went to University of California, Santa Barbara, and one of the guys on staff when I was there was Alexander Callow. I did not study under him, but he wrote the book on the Tweed Ring. And folks, it's not a long book. Get Callow's book, The Tweed Ring. It's one of the best reads you'll ever have, especially when he gets into the gangs of New York, which literally is where they took the details for that movie, Gangs of New York, from. And Hellcat Annie and Battle Maggie, whatever her name was, and all these women fighters and all these gangs. It's just hysterical to read that.
Well,
You're
I
right.
learned to appreciate that when I read The Power Broker. Just how much New York was built on corruption from the very beginning. And everything costs more to build in New York. Every public work, every public project, the levels and levels of corruption and graft are so mind-boggling. And it's just amazing that people don't see this.
It's like Rio de Janeiro or Bogota. I mean, you have this silent bribe that you have to pay to everybody to get stuff done. To me, the amazing thing is not that the Tweed Ring did what it did. The amazing thing is that somebody finally said, we got to get rid of this, and actually tried to arrest them. I think they got one guy in jail and they got back something like $2,000.
It is actually amazing. There are similar battles. I wouldn't want to call them the same, but I mean, obviously, you do have in our time. Obviously, we are living through a period where there are these really deeply pitched sectoral battles between those who are absolutely committed to continuing some version of a spoil system and you know big government and you know uh, government domination of so many spheres of life versus some other vision. And of
Right.
course there are people who are purists. I mean, let me actually fast forward to this. It's not the best segue I've ever done, but it's not unrelated either. This was brought to my attention by Larry Schweikart today. How the Electoral College could tilt further from Democrats. And guys, they have been tilting against the Electoral College for decades
Well, I'm
because
glad
it.
you brought that up. And, I'm looking at the clock and I can't believe we've almost used half our time already. I didn't even get to talk about the presidential structure that Van Buren set up, but this article is key. And to me, I've been following whom I call the moderate Democrats. I don't really believe there's such a thing, but there's a group of moderate Democrats such as Rui Teixeira and James Carville and Nate Moore and maybe Noah Smith. I'm not sure. But there's a group of these people who for over a year have been doing their best to scream from their news articles, their written posts, their interviews, that the Democrat Party had to get more moderate, move more toward the middle if it had any hope of winning an election again. And just the opposite has been happening, as you know. I mean, look at New York with your wonderful, amazing Zoran, who is likely to win the mayor's race there. But anyway, these moderates have been saying, you guys are going off a cliff with this stuff for over a year. So I made whatever bones I have in 2016 by calling the Trump election. It's in my book, How Trump Won. I called it on Twitter in October saying Trump will win with, quote, between 300 and 320 electoral votes. This is at a time nobody thought he would even win. If he won, maybe by one electoral vote. I said, no, he's got locked down between 300 and 320 electoral votes. And the final was 304. Um, Again, I'm not going to talk about 2020 because we know there's all sorts of issues with that election. But if you jump to 2024 in my Substacks, I said in June of last year, Trump will win with 312 electoral votes and he will win the popular vote. Now, this is a time when people said, well, he could win the electoral college. He'll never win the popular vote. And by October, I refined that to say he will win the popular vote by 1.5%.
I remember. I was there.
Exactly what he won by.
I'm sure I reposted many of those predictions, in fact.
Well, have I been reading goat entrails or, how did I come to that? And the answer is I look at voter registration trends and statistics.
Now, this is amazing to me because, I'm friendly with Scott Pressler,
Yes.
and he spends so much energy on voter registration. We just turned Pennsylvania, and I'm always saying to myself, voter registration, so what? That really matters?
It really matters.
It really matters.
So here's the deal. Let's talk. What is a poll? When most people see, oh, there's a poll out there showing Kamala Harris beating Trump by 3 points. What's a poll? A pollster calls, in theory, if they're honest, a panel or a group of people who represent certain types: Democrats, Republicans, independents, Hispanics, women, young, old. And you have to fill in all these boxes and balance them out to your view of what the electorate looks like. So right away, a bias is introduced by any liberal pollster whose view of what the electorate looks like always tends to look like what the electorate would look like if he had his way. And the second thing to remember is once you get that panel and you start calling people or doing online surveys, what you next find is that a poll is a device to measure what people are thinking at a certain time in their life. But what we think changes not only from day to day, but sometimes hour to hour. I can't tell you how many times I'll get up in the morning and be grumpy or depressed. And by lunch, man, I'll just be walking on air. A littlest thing will change and you interpret the whole world differently. So a poll is a survey of what people think is going to happen in a future event. A voter registration is an action. In most states, you are not automatically enrolled to vote. You have to actually go through a small process to register to vote. It may involve checking boxes and with the state Secretary of State or various other things, but you have to actually do something, which always trumps thinking something. I'm thinking I may win a Nobel Prize today, but I have to do something to make that happen. And voter registration is an action as opposed to polls, which are thoughts. That's a very, very important distinction. Second thing to understand about voter registrations is they lag. They lag what people are thinking. So all those people that Scott Pressler registered to turn Republican, they had been thinking Republican and maybe even voting Republican for years before they actually went through the process of becoming a Republican. It's what some people go through in the religious conversion, whether it's to Judaism or Christianity. I kind of like what I'm hearing about this. I want to read about it further. And they may even start going to synagogue or church. And then finally go, you know what? I'm going to walk down that aisle, or I'm going to engage in the steps that's required to become a Jew. That they will go through a process and action to reflect what they've been thinking about for years. That's voter registration. So I'm convinced it is 100 times more accurate than any poll out there. That said, where are we? The Democrats are getting crushed. in voter registrations. Even I think the Times came out with a piece about a week ago saying, you know what, Democrats are really losing voters. And they've lost 2.1 million voters on Democrat rolls since 2020. Republicans have gained 2.4 million on voter rolls since 2020. Now, you could look at that as a 4.5 million shift, but it's kind of irrelevant. Just focus on the larger number, the Republicans gaining 2.4 million nationally. Now, that's just your first step. Second step is there is a process hitting America right now that none of the pollsters and the New York Times aren't even considering. Because to consider it means they would have to admit that previous Democrat and even Republican administrations engaged in outright criminality, which is illegal aliens are being deported at an astonishing rate. Last week, the Department of Homeland Security, DOJ, said the number was 1.6 million total deportees or voluntary deportees. So let's add that 1.6 million to the 2.4 million Republicans we already had, because those are mostly Democrat voters.
All right, so the you have just said, without saying it, that every illegal alien was voting, and every illegal alien was voting Democrat.
I would qualify that and say that maybe 50% of the illegal aliens are voting. A majority are voting Democrats. We're now coming down to maybe a few 100,000, but it's still in the Democrats' favor. I think a higher percentage of illegals voted for Republicans than many people guess, but I don't think it's anywhere close to 50%. Nevertheless, this is the iron law of numbers, and they are all coming off the Democrat side. But by 2028, those numbers are likely to be 1 million Democrat illegal alien voters won't be voting, and that's key.
This is great.
So let's go to our third step. Voter roll purges. Another thing that nobody's even talking about are often required by state constitutions, as they are in California. But nobody has been purging the rolls until they were forced to do so by Judicial Watch about a year or so ago.
Judicial Watch was doing what the press didn't do, what law enforcement didn't do, what the Civil Rights Division didn't do. One guy.
Yep.
One guy in his...
Tom Fitton.
He's not his one guy, but Tom Fitton. He deserves to have every picture taken with that muscle shirt, okay? Because it's mind-boggling.
Well, my favorite team, you'll hate this being a New Yorker, is the Dallas Cowboys. And of course, you'll love it that they suck so bad now. Yeah. But they do have the Ring of Honor up there. I think they were one of the first teams to establish a Ring of Honor. And if you had a Ring of Honor for the current shift that is going on in our country, there would certainly be two faces up there. Trump, obviously, but there would be two other faces, and that would be Tom Fitton and Scott Presler. Those guys are doing more to reshape this than any politician other than Trump. So where are we in California, to quote Arnold Schwarzenegger? We have seen 2.1 million taken off voter rolls in California. Now, looking at how people vote there, that is probably around 1.2 to 1.4 million Democrats and about 600,000 Republicans. So add another 600,000 that have come off the Democrat side of the ledger. Where are we now? We're getting pretty close to 4 million nationally, and I'm not even looking at the voter roll purges in other states like Oklahoma or New York or Illinois or wherever else we may or may not see these voter roll purges. It depends on how long the governors resist, what's in the state constitutions and what needs to be done.
How about mail-in voting?
Mail-in voting is getting to be greatly adumbrated and restricted. Trump started his attack on mail-in voting last week with a tweet, a truth, and every time he does that, actions follow. with Trump, when he says something, you can better believe there is paperwork in the process, in the pipeline to follow up. And so I expect a full-scale assault on mail-in voting pretty soon. We're the only civilized nation in the world that has this idiot process, and we need to get rid of it. It's how I believe they stole 2020. It wasn't Dominion machines, it was the mules, it was mail-in voting for 3 or 4 months where they could go out and scout locations like nursing homes and apartment buildings, find out who died, who moved, request absentee ballots, send them back in, or early ballots, send them back in. So you've got that. But there's one more where there's actually two more factors that are working against Democrats. First is there's a lot of discussion now about a mid-decade census. If they do a mid-decade census and they only allow American citizens, remember, we're not talking deportations now. We got rid of them in the last discussion. Now we're talking about all the illegals who are still here, but still may be listed as voters. What happens if we do a mid-decade census and remove all of them, only allow American citizens to vote? There goes another
Only
million
allowed
Democrats
American citizens to be counted for
to
apportionment
be
purposes.
counted. Yes, for representation. Yes. There go another million off the Democrat rolls. And then finally, you come to what's happening that everybody, including the Times, is paying attention to, which I think is the least of all these five that I've listed, and that is redistricting, whereby Texas is already redistricted. California is saying, well, we'll counter that. We'll redistrict and get rid of 4 or 5 Republicans. I'll come back to that in a second. Florida may redistrict. That would be a net 2 for Republicans. Probably 1 Democrat and 2 Republicans come out of that. Ohio, same thing. 3 seats are up for redistricting. This is by their constitution. 2 of those are definitely going to be Republican seats. One of Marcy Kaptur, she only won by 0.00 something in the last cycle. So you redistrict, you're going to get a net gain of anywhere from 10 to 12 Republican seats, even after California checks in.
And that's if California can get away with it.
Yeah.
And they've got some real hurdles to overcome.
Yeah, I mean, they have a plebiscite to get by. They have court cases to, we'll see. But here's the point I want to make. And Seth Keshel, who everybody should follow on Substack, Captain CAPN K's Corner, need to follow him. He does exquisite work on these districts. And he says, just because they redistrict doesn't necessarily mean they're going to go blue. Because to move a bunch of blue voters into this district, you got to take them out of this district, and it makes many other districts vulnerable or toss-ups. But the last I saw with Cook,
well, I saw someone use the term, it turns them into thin blue districts.
Exactly. So last I saw with Cook, they were about 216 after both Texas and, if California does it, California goes through 216 safe Republican seats. Ohio adds 2. That's the House majority. Florida adds 2. That pads the majority. Now Missouri and several other states, mostly Republican, are talking about redistricting. So I think that as of today, where are we? August 25th, 2025. I think the House is a lock for Republicans.
So the 17th Amendment is basically being undone by shifting the power to the state houses to essentially select who goes to the House instead of the Senate.
Yeah. Yeah. But when you take all of these things together, any one of them could sink the Democrats. Any one of them. Voter registration shifts, deportation of illegals, redrawing the census, redistrict, any of those can sink the Democrats. When you put all 5 of those together, I don't know if you saw Deep Impact, one of my favorite movies, about the meteors that strike the world. And of course, a group of astronauts go up and they're able to blow up the worst meteor, but one still gets through and it still is going to cause massive tidal waves. And in one of the final scenes, this girl and her father, young woman and her father, hugging, and you see this 200-foot tall tidal wave about to hit New York City. And it's terrifying. This is what is coming for the Democrats. And I don't think anybody on either side fully appreciates how big this tidal wave is.
But I do think they know it if not all five channels, they know about many of the channels.
Yeah.
And I've been writing for years, and you know, because you've seen my stuff too. The Democrats realize they have lost politically their ideas. They've never been a party of ideas, as you point out. They were founded on a party of power acquisition. As a party of power acquisition, like the Bolsheviks, and whatever they have to say to get power and retain power is the policy of the Democrats. Why isn't that working?
Well, let's put it this way, and you're absolutely right. You'll notice that in now almost 40 minutes of discussion of the Democrat Party, we haven't really talked about a single Democrat idea. And there was a fantastic article by this strategist, Alex Castellanos. He's mostly a Republican, but he also deals in the third way kind of stuff. And he said that the Democrat Party has become a messianic party for a bunch of these utterly kook burger ideas, whether it's green transition, whether it's men are women and women are men, whether it's depolicing or defunding the police, whether it's open borders. It doesn't matter what policy they support. It's an 80-20 policy against them. And that's why I say if you look at these structural issues, for the Democrats to win, they would have to flip on a majority of those ideological issues that they are not showing any inclination of flipping whatsoever. And this flip
Because
would
they
have
let
to,
their 20 control their 80 every single time.
yes,
And so that of course is antithetical to what Van Buren had in mind,
yes,
right? Because his approach would be stay on the straight and narrow, don't make trouble because ideas are irrelevant. But here they not only make trouble, they go out of their way to pick the most. I mean, a month ago, was it, or 2 months ago, visiting illegal alien violent felons to support them. And of course, now they have embedded their partisans into the judiciary and into the deep state, and that's made so that insulates them a little bit from the democratic small d process. But at the end of the day, these are lunatic positions, and David Harsanyi to some extent got at that with his Blue and the Rise of Blue Anon book. It's a similar thesis.
I would not say that Van Buren was opposed to all ideas just for the sake of power. The one idea he was committed to was that slavery must be protected. And so you describe the Democrats as a party of power or raw aggressive power. I would say they were the party of slavery. And they still are, but today they've added to it the party of anti-life. Virtually every ideological position you can cite in the Democrat Party is hostile to life, whether it's abortion, whether it's depolicing neighborhoods, whether it's allowing in criminal alien invaders to attack Americans in their home, no matter, and just the latest, and I've got to cite another guy, a friend, not a friend, a person I know through reading his stuff, Jeff Childers, and I don't know if he pronounces it Childers, but he had a piece today on how the Ukrainian military now is putting pregnant women in the front lines. And the New York Times says, oh, they can do the job as well as a man. I want a woman out there who's experienced childbirth to tell me how when her first labor pain hit, she would be able to aim, sight, and fire an RPG in an advancing enemy. Please tell me how you're going to do that. Yet no man would ever have that problem. So go ahead.
Well, I think what you're describing here is that the creation of bubbles of ideological bubbles, the New York Times, the network TV, late night TV, they have maintained, and the universities, so they maintained capture of these institutions and these bubbles, and they're no longer realizing that they're the 20 percenters, and therefore they're not cognizant of the fact that it's not just not just a matter of I don't know anyone who voted for Nixon.
Right.
They don't know anyone. I mean, and this is literally true. They don't know anyone. They don't understand. I get this question all the time from old friends on Facebook. Ron, how could you support Trump? Why the hell wouldn't I support
Really.
Trump? What has
How can
Trump
you not
done?
support him?
What has Trump? I had a guy call me up, a distant relative of mine, called me on Sunday out of nowhere, who I met through 23andMe. Okay. And I don't know whether he was just trying to start up with me, but he said something about how because of the big beautiful bill, it's getting to be like Dachau out there. I said, "What? What? What are you referring to? Are people actually?" So I played stupid. People are being rounded up and gassed. He said, "No, but it's a lot like that." What the fuck are you talking about? What are you talking about? So there, but there is this illusion because of our participation in the culture that is presented to us by these institutions that we're a shrinking minority and
Right.
that they're taking over.
Well, okay, so there's a couple of things there. First of all, we haven't mentioned another factor that is completely working against. I mean, you can stack these up, and it's just astounding to see what's about to fall on these people. Trump has been magnificent in defunding the left at every
Whoa,
single level, whether it's
boy, that
USA.
USA thing, they squealed like a pig on that one, didn't they?
Well, and why? I think now all of a sudden Colbert has to step down because they're just not profitable anymore, and Howard Stern has to step down because they're just not profitable anymore. And I think before too long you're going to see things like the Harpy's Nest of The View have to go away. Why? Because their source of money has dried up. There has always been this back channel of money that these corporations will allow these idiots to stay on the air so long as they aren't costing them. But now they're actually costing them a lot of money. And Trump is now going after the money in the university systems, saying, nope, can't teach woke DEI garbage. You're supposed to be teaching real subjects here. If you're going to do that, we'll just take away your federal funding. He's not threatening to close the universities, which is interesting. They find the removal of federal money an existential threat while sitting on a $58 billion endowment. How crazy is that? So Trump is going after their money sources too, and those are drying up. So it's easy to get in that bubble. And, for people who've never read it, look at Charles Murray's great book, Losing Ground, because he has an amazing bubble test in there. Yes, it's outdated in a lot of ways because he makes reference to movies and restaurants and TV shows that aren't around anymore, but it's still very, very apropos. And he says things like, he asks questions such as, do you know anyone who smokes? Have you ever been to a parade that wasn't a gay pride or environmental parade? Do you know what these insignias mean? And he would give 3 or 4 military insignias. On and on. Have you ever eaten, let's use Cracker Barrel. Have you ever eaten at any of these restaurants in the past year, and Applebee's or Cracker Barrel or things like this? And his point is this is stuff the vast majority of middle class people do all the time. One of his questions was, have you ever worked a job in which you hurt at the end of every day? And yes, I certainly have. So if you take that test, I gave that test all the time to my students. And it was very interesting that toward the end, I actually had one female student who got a 0. She was so bubbleized she couldn't pass one of those questions. And she didn't even know it. She didn't even realize how insulated and isolated her life had been from the vast majority of Americans. And Murray would say, this is absolutely true, that in DC, many people, if they don't have someone to go pick up their laundry for them or fill up their car with gas or wash their cars, they will never, ever even interact with someone from a different class, which is shocking. So these bubbles have gone from being like cellophane to becoming iron domes of resistance by these people who still believe they're in the majority.
Mind-boggling. Larry, you're all over the place in a good way. You have your arms around so much of what's going on, which is why I've always enjoyed following you. And when you restarted your you somehow you lost your X account and you had to start it again.
Two times.
Well, the last time I got on the list of people who got followed, and I said, finally, I'm on Larry Schweikart's radar because it's just absolutely fascinating. What's the pace? A book a year?
Yeah, I keep saying I'm not going to write another book. I'm done. And I've said that now for three books. I had not planned to write this current book till I decided somebody's got to say this. I don't see anything out there on the horizon doing this. But then just about 3 or 4 weeks ago, I had it put on my heart that we need a book called American Biography that traces the history of the United States through the lives of 100 key people. So that's my next book. The publisher loved it. He wants to get it out by Father's Day, which means I've got to write it before Christmas. But I'm looking at 100 key people, everybody from Bradford to Jonathan Edwards to, of course, some of the politicians like Washington to Booker T. Washington and Jane Fonda and Ralph Nader and Donald Trump and Elvis Presley, people like that who have made America one way or the other. They're not all good, but
Right.
they've all affected America.
Larry, I hope that you continue to have an effect on America and hopefully a bigger and bigger one. And I thank you so much for culminating today with me. And everybody, look up the history, wide world of history, and follow Larry on X on his third account.
Third iteration. Yeah. Thank you, Ron.